Good evening and welcome to another edition of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Ryan Roberts and these are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Miss Shelley Pruitt. How are y'all doing tonight?
I'm excited. We got some mobsters. Hell yeah.
I know you would be. I mean, we got the mobster tonight, y'all.
I'm like, it was to the point where everybody was like, oh, Shelley's all over this one. Surprise!
I am an honorary Italian now.
So. Oh, yeah. Sal said you were, so.
Yes, that's right. I'm honorary Italian, so I'm all ready to hear about my people.
So now before we dive in, do you guys know anything about? I know Shelley, I know you know about Lucky Luciano. Blake, do you know anything about Lucky Luciano?
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Yep, sure do. I'm right along with y'all on this one.
Blake is not as fascinated with the mobsters as Ryan and I.
I just listen. I love the stories. I just have a thing about the macho world where it's like, oh, I got big balls. Look at me swinging as I walk in the room. You know.
I mean, yeah, there is an element to that in a lot of the mob stories, but the story of the mob is the story of America. You have people who came here and became something. Now, it might not have been the way you would have done it, but they became something, and now people remember them for the rest of all time.
I'm always fascinated by the creativity of how they whack people.
Absolutely.
That fascinates me, how creative they can get.
Oh, yeah, and boy, do they get creative. And this is a big topic because you're going to find out today that the story of Lucky Luciano is essentially the story of the American Mafia. So we're going to go right into it.
I do know that.
Because, I mean, he's at the forefront of everything. And every mobster that you can think about in the 30s, he crossed paths with or touched in some way. Like, that their stories, crossed over.
I was about to say, clarify that, because that sounds a little dirty.
Well, the ones he did touch aren't living anymore. So, there you go.
True. That's very true.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in, guys. So, Charles Lucky Luciano was born Salvatore Luciana on the island of Sicily on November the 11th, 1897, to a hardworking sulfur miner named Antonio Luciana and a stay-at-home mother named Rosalie. Lucky had two older siblings, but he was the last of his family to be born in the old country, because by the time he was 10, his parents had had enough of the poverty and strife that Italy had to offer. So, like many other Italians, they turned their eyes to the land of opportunity. And in early May of 1907, boarded a steamship from Palermo, Sicily, bound for the Big Apple.
Ah, the mother country.
I could have swore at first, when he was around 10, that his parents were fed up and done with him. That's where I thought they were going for a second. I was like, damn, this is going to start off rough. All right, got it.
Oh, well, you might be more right than what you think you are. So.
Okay, got it.
So the steamship buzzed with excitement. Men and women talked about their dreams and aspirations. They knew not what lay ahead, but they knew it was better than what they had left behind. America was the promised land. There, anything was possible. They could not wait to reach her golden shores and see their new home. Upon arrival in America, Luciano's family was processed through the infamous Gateway to Freedom, the processing facility at Ellis Island. It was an intense affair for the Italian family because the selection process was very strict. If the authorities deemed you sick or a public danger, they could deny you entry into the country.
Well, Shelley's out.
On the sick or the
Either one. Either
maybe a little
one.
bit of both.
It just depends on which way they're going to go. One of the two.
But Luciano and his family passed with flying colors and were taken ashore to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Once ashore, Luciano and his fellow countrymen were surprised that the America that they were met with. It was not the glamorous vision they had in their heads. There was poverty and filth as far as the eye could see. Because of a sanitary worker strike, the streets were lined with garbage, and clouds of flies swarmed the rotting piles.
Ew.
The living conditions weren't much better. Droves of immigrants were forced to live in crowded tenements that packed multiple large families right on top of each other in small 3-bedroom apartments that often shared toilets with multiple residents in the building. Crime was also through the roof and was committed daily just to survive. It wasn't what was promised on the passage over, but now it was home, and the new residents had to make the best of it. This new reality was no different for the Luciano family. Like their countrymen, they moved into a tenement building over on First Avenue. The conditions were not the best, but Antonio worked hard to support his family by busting his ass as a day laborer and making an honest living. But the young Salvatore watched his father toil away and saw his honest work would get him nowhere. So Salvatore saw a new way forward. Even though he was only 10, he had become friendly with one of the many child gangs that terrorized the immigrant neighborhoods.
What is up with all these guys? Like at the last couple of weeks that we're covering, it's like 10, 15, like all this. Like Jesus,
they start early, man. So he and his accomplices mugged people in broad daylight and took their profits back to the older kids.
10-year-old, give me your money. Get out of here, you little shit.
You little son of a bitch, give it to me.
Get out of here. Who are you talking to? Get the fuck out of here.
And so they took their profits back to the older kids, who would give them a cut and keep most of the money. But while the others were happy just to get a cut, Lucky was paying very close attention to how the older kids extorted the young ones. He was taking it all in and learning. And soon, he put his education into practice. When he started his own protection racket, offering to protect Jewish kids from other Italian and Irish kids in the neighborhood for a nominal fee, of course.
Oh, of course. Wait, how old is he? Still 10 at this point?
Yeah, he's like 10 or 11 at this point.
What? I can't even organize my own real estate business, let alone a protection service for somebody.
Right.
Like, damn.
But they said he was a bigger kid, and so like he was able to kind of protect some of the smaller kids, and he'd use his size as advantage.
He filled a niche. Yeah.
I mean, I give it to him. Damn.
Right. Now, one of these kids was a young Meyer Lansky, a kid who would end up being Lucky's best friend and business partner. Lucky approached him one day and said, "Hey, if you want to stay alive, Jew boy, you got to pay us about 5 cents a week for the protection money." Young Lansky cocked his head to the side, stared Lucky down and said, "Hey, go fuck yourself." Lucky admired his grit and his fuck you attitude.
And he went, "Did we just become best friends?"
Yes, he did. Exactly. He said so. The two became fast friends, and they became inseparable. And now, while Lucky was conducting his business, he neglected to show up for school. And in 1911 was picked up for truancy. The authorities wasted no time and sent him to a secure school in Brooklyn for about 4 months.
A secure school? Is that like a juvenile hall where they lock?
Kind of, yeah. It's like, like the school where all the bad kids go. It's under lock and key. They're watching them to make sure they do come to school.
I should have known that there would have been voices involved in this episode. Why didn't I not think of that? Ryan, pull your microphone away from your beard, man.
Hey, man.
Killing me.
Yeah.
Trim it down, friend.
Hey, I had a chance to go to the barber today. So for about 4 months, which inadvertently had the opposite effect that was intended, it only taught him to be more of a criminal. And by the time he was out, his reputation preceded him. More people on the street knew who he was than ever before.
He
So
did
he decided,
time in the big house.
yeah, the kid big house. So he decided to put his reputation to good use and turn it into money. And with that new attitude and determination to succeed, Lucky never set foot in a school ever again. Not wanting to go back to school and needing a cover, Lucky got himself a job working as a delivery boy and shipping clerk at the Goodman Hat Company. This provided him a legitimate job and allowed him to participate in illicit activities after hours. Because he was still pulling jobs off the clock and building his reputation in the underworld, he decided that even though he was 14, it was a good idea to pick up a pistol. After all, he never knew when a mugging could go south, and he would need to protect himself.
Again, 14, like, god dang. I mean, I realize like a lot of these guys are kind of like products of their time and stuff like that.
For sure.
I understand that, but it's just like, whew. It just
Yeah,
kind of
you had to grow up.
I was gonna say, it just kind of shows you how well we had it. Ain't gonna lie,
Right.
I could not imagine a 14 like doing shit like this.
Having to survive.
Having
Right.
to. That's the thing.
Right, and you had to grow up fast too, because no one cared about you. You had to. That's why the immigrant population stuck together and they watched each other's backs, and that's why these gangs sprouted up, because they needed protection from other people. Because the cops didn't care, the authorities didn't care. They needed community, and that's why all this happened.
This is crazy. Like, I mean, I just remember me at 14. I think I was still watching SpongeBob SquarePants.
I know I was.
Pick up that pistol. I'm ready.
So he got his hands on a pistol, and one day decided to show it off to one of his friends. And as he was showing off the gun, it went off and the bullet grazed Lucky's leg.
Oh, shit.
And to add insult to injury, Lucky's father found his pistol a few days later and pointed it directly in Lucky's face, telling Lucky he should shoot him himself for bringing shame and disdain to the Luciano name. So Lucky decided right then and there that he was done living under his father's roof. He hit the street and began sleeping at friends' houses and in empty apartments and in the back of pool halls. But after making a little cash, he used his underworld connections to find a place to stay. And things went good for a while, until he found himself in the illicit drug trade. Lucky began making runs for a local drug dealer. It was easy, quick money, and Lucky was making quite a bit of it. But one day, it came back to bite him in the ass. The drug dealer asked him to make a heroin drop to a local prostitute at a nearby bar. Lucky took the heroin and made the routine drop, but the sex worker had a secret. She was a police informant, and Lucky was busted. He was instantly arrested and sent up the river to the New Hampton Farms Reformatory for an 8-month bid. But no matter how much the fudge tried to make him talk, Lucky remained extremely tight-lipped and never gave up any info on his business partners or friends.
Yeah, he wasn't no damn rat.
No,
and this
absolutely
is at 14 still, right?
No, he's a little bit older at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, he's older at this point.
Still,
I think it was 16 when that
16,
happened to him.
Yeah, 16, 17, I
16.
believe. Or he might have been 18. He's in his later teens at this point.
Okay.
So, but Lucky remained tight-lipped and never gave up any info on his business partners or friends, which boosted his reputation even more. Criminals on the street knew they could trust him. And after 8 months, Lucky came out of prison with that reputation and another thing. While inside, he had changed his government name. He was no longer Salvatore. He didn't like that name because prisoners would call him Sally in order to emasculate him. So he changed his name to a more American-sounding name, one that he thought was strong and manly. He was now Charlie Luciano. And it was time. And it was the name that he would use till the day that he died. After Lucky got out, he went right back to the streets. But this time, he teamed up with his old pal Meyer, who brought along their unhinged friend Bugsy Siegel. The trio began offering their services as muscle for hire to various bootleggers throughout New York City, which netted them a good amount of money. But one day they crossed paths with the foot soldiers of a rather powerful mafia boss. And that boss's name was Joe the Boss Masseria. Masserea had heard about this fierce Sicilian that ran around with a couple of Jewish kids. And because of Lucky's reputation, Masserea decided to recruit Lucky and make him a hired gun in his criminal organization. Lucky jumped at the opportunity and began working for the biggest criminal kingpin in New York City.
Damn.
Things were good working for Masserea. Lucky was making a boatload of money. However, there was one thing that he didn't like, and it was Masserea's old school attitude. Because Masserea was straight off the boat from Italy and a devout Catholic. He believed that organized crime should strictly be Italian, and he urged Lucky to, quote, get rid of his, quote, Jew friends. But Lucky refused. Lucky thought, why not bring them into the organization? After all, immigrants and crime syndicates were more powerful when they worked together. But Masserea didn't see it that way. So Lucky kept his mouth shut. But he also began working with another organized crime figure who just so happened to be Jewish, and his name was Arnold Rothstein. Now, Rothstein was very wealthy, and he was a major crime lord who preferred to do things in a clandestine manner and work behind the scenes, pulling the strings to achieve his goals with his large amount of money. He earned himself the nickname, the quote, bankroll, and participated in high-stakes gambling, hustled pool, and ran numbers. Eventually, he graduated to distortion and loan sharking. He was pulling in money left and right, and when he needed a job done, he hired a gangster to do his dirty work. Never one to fight, drink, or dress extravagantly, Rothstein was unassuming, and he liked it that way. Through his underground connections, he met a young Lucky Luciano and saw limitless potential in him. He would take Lucky and his Jewish friends under his wing and use them to take care of his business. But he also taught Lucky many valuable things. He taught him how to act in high-class establishments and how to act around women and how to dress stylishly but not too flashy. Most of all, he taught him to be covert. Don't draw attention and make moves silently. Lucky took all of this advice in and used it to his advantage to navigate the crime world and become a legend. He had two excellent role models. In his two bosses, one taught him the hard way to do business, while the other one taught him the more sophisticated way to get around his rivals. And that balance of cunning and ruthlessness would serve Lucky well in his criminal career. Luciano was making powerful friends and was making them lots of money. But with the passage of the Volstead Act, ushering in the era of Prohibition on January the 17th, 1920, Lucky and his associates were about to make a lot more money. The Mafia had already been involved in other vices, but now they had one more to add to their list. And even though a law was passed preventing alcohol sales, America still had a major appetite for drink. And come hell or high water, they were going to get it. So the mobsters and street gangs began manufacturing and transporting illicit booze, and Lucky was going to get in on that action.
That bathtub gin.
Oh, yeah, that nasty-ass bathtub gin.
As you take a drink.
Mm-hmm. Brewed it myself.
God.
So he got together with Lansky, and the two went into business together. And in 1924, Lucky and Lansky leased an office in the Claridge Hotel, from there Rothstein gave them his blessing. The two set up their headquarters and began running booze for profit, arranging drops and deliveries, and for some of New York's biggest underworld players too. Even Joe Masserea got a little piece of their action. But the tension between the Sicilians and the Jewish gangsters continued to boil over, and all came to a head one night in Atlantic City. A load of scotch had come into Atlantic City and was supposed to be dropped off to Waxy Gordon down in Philly. Waxy was a business associate of Rothstein and had contracted some of Masserea's men to guard the booze on the way to the drop-off point. However, Bugsy Siegel heard about the drop and grabbed Lansky and other members of their gang, and they went deep into the woods on the truck route and cut down a tree to block the road and covered their faces. And they waited on the trucks to come through. And at about 3:30 a.m., the trucks came down the road and stopped so Massarea's men could get out and remove the tree. As they got out of their trucks, a hail of bullets ripped through the woods, killing some of the Italians, but only scaring others. The Jewish gangsters quickly descended onto the survivors and beat them within an inch of their lives. But one of the Sicilians recognized Lansky and watched Lansky and Bugsy hijack the whiskey load. The survivor got back to Massarea and let him know who it was that killed his men. Massarea hit the roof. He wanted Lansky and Siegel dead, but knew how close they were to Lucky and how good they were for business. So Massarea let Bucky and Lansky live. And if it weren't for Lucky, they would have been 6 feet under. Lucky was building his influence. But Lucky wasn't only building his influence in the crime world. The cops were also starting to pay attention to him. On October the 17th, 1929, Lucky was picked up outside of his home by several plainclothes police officers. One of them put Lucky in handcuffs and threw him into the back of their car. They immediately put tape on his eyes and began to ask him questions about another gangster named Jack Diamond. Lucky, following the cardinal rule of the mob, refused to talk. So the officers began to beat him, and one of them was wearing a ring and beat Lucky about the face until he was good and bloody. Realizing he wasn't going to talk, they beat him until he passed out and dumped him in a field on Staten Island. Lucky woke up around 1 a.m., not knowing where he was. His eyes were full of blood and so swollen he could barely see. He got himself up and found a road and began looking for civilization. He came across a person and yelled at him to grab a cab, but the person just so happened to be a patrolman. And Lucky, being an absolute bloody mess, the patrolman grabbed him and took him back down to the station, where they cleaned him up and realized that they had a notorious mobster on their hands. So they brought in a detective to talk to him. But true to form, Lucky gave the detective absolutely nothing. Meyer Lansky heard about what had happened to his friend and went out to go check on him.
I can just see this going on.
Yeah.
Who hit you? I hit myself. I was really mad.
Yeah. Oh, I tripped.
Yeah, nobody hit me. None of your business.
What happened to you? I fell. Man.
Like 30 times.
You have a ring imprint on your face. I fell on a ring. What the fuck do you want? And when he saw the battered Charles Luciano, he gave him his now infamous nickname. He told him, "We're going to have to call you Lucky from now on because you ought to be dead." And Lucky is the name that stuck with him. The newly christened Lucky continued to work illicitly and make money for himself and Massarea. But while Lucky was working as Massarea's underling, another mobster stepped onto the scene, named Salvatore Maranzano, and he wanted to challenge Massarea's authority directly. Maranzano came to America from Sicily in 1925 and made a fortune bootlegging. And while he was on the come-up, he decided that he really didn't like Massarea. He wanted what Massarea had and tried to use his influence to turn the closest of Massarea's friends against him. And eventually, the two ended up in a gang war vying for honor and power. Lucky was one of Massarea's most trusted allies, and Maranzano knew that. But he also knew that Lucky was a reasonable man and was very practical. The gang war between Maranzano and Massarea had been making things pretty hard for the mob, and it was escalating and getting more and more bloody, and was attracting a whole lot of unwanted attention from the authorities and making it extremely hard for them to do business. So in February 1931, Maranzano approached Lucky. He told Lucky that a lot of the fighting was just plain bad for business, and if someone were to kill Massarea, the fighting would stop. He also gave Lucky his word that if Joe the Boss Massarea was knocked off, he would not take vengeance on Massarea's former gang. And Lucky thought about the offer. He knew that Maranzano was right. Even though Massarea trusted Lucky, he knew it was time for him to go. So he accepted Maranzano's offer and organized the hit on his own boss. On April the 15th, 1931, Lucky invited Masserea to meet him and 2 others for lunch at his favorite restaurant on Coney Island. Lucky, his boss, and his 2 associates had a large lunch and seemed to be having a pretty good time. And Lucky wanted to keep the good time going, so he suggested that they play cards. And after a few hands, Lucky said he had to go to the bathroom and got up from the table and walked away. Little did Masserea know, that was the signal for the assassins waiting outside to fill him full of lead. As Lucky was taking a leak, the 2 men busted in the front door, and Lucky's 2 associates at the table stood up. All 4 men shot Masserea a total of 5 times, as he clutched the tablecloth and fell to the ground dead. Masserea had been taken out by the new guard. Along with Luciano, these 4 men would become infamous. Vito Genovese, Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, and Joe Adonis had just etched their names in history. Luciano came out of the bathroom, and the men left the scene, leaving their former boss in a pool of his own blood on the ground. Although it was a quick hit and carried out relatively quietly, Luciano was quick to claim responsibility and let it be known that there was a new pecking order. He also let it be known that he didn't kill his boss out of any sort of loyalty to Maranzano. He did it to serve his own needs, and Maranzano had better keep his word. Maranzano, in fact, lived up to his word, but called Luciano and over 500 mobsters to a meeting soon afterwards. Luciano was not happy about this, because it flew in the face of everything he was taught about being discreet. But Maranzano wanted everyone to know that Masserea was dead and that he had orchestrated the hit. But he also made another proclamation, one that would change the mob and the face of organized crime forever. Maranzano declared himself the boss of all bosses. He then proclaimed that the mob would be organized into 5 families, one representing each borough of New York. Each head of each family would answer to him, and no one could harm a member of the opposite family unless it was a sanctioned kill. Also, the leads of each family were off limits and could not be moved against. And with that, he named the leads of the families. The 5 were Joseph Bonanno, Joseph Perfacci, Tom Gagliano, Vincent Magadino, and last but not least, Lucky Luciano.
Okay, so around what time is this? What are we like year-wise?
It
is, I said 1930.
It's going to be like 35, 36, somewhere.
Yes, it was right after they hit Maranzano. 31.
31?
Okay.
Oh,
all right.
that's where
okay. That's where I thought we were, but I just wanted to clarify and make sure. But hold on, wait. So they're calling, you said over 500 other gangsters.
Organized crime.
Like mob stock,
it was
1931 or something?
It was very much a come and kiss the ring, but very
It was.
Gotti-esque.
Yeah.
Like Gotti did. It was, and that's what you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to
Right.
gather. You're not supposed to be, in public places. That's a good way to get pinched.
Right, and that's what pissed Lucky off, because he's like, you got to be discreet, because everything he was taught from Rothstein was be discreet, move in the shadows. But Maranzano was very brazen, very bold. He wanted everybody to know, hey, I did this. Now I'm the boss. You answer to me. So he called that meeting. Now everyone was to put their differences aside, and this was a new mafia, and there was a lot of money to be made. And Lucky had come so far from being a street thug to the head of his own crime family. He brought in old friends to help him, one being Meyer Lansky, of course, who was handling his money and helping him plan. But since Lansky wasn't Italian, he couldn't be Luciano's right-hand man. So Luciano immediately made Vito Genovese his underboss and began plotting for more. Even though he was the head of a crime family, he really didn't care for Maranzano. He thought, just like Masserea, Maranzano was too old school. The mafia needed a new type of leader, one that was young and forward-thinking. He had already knocked off one old world boss. Why not one more? But Lucky put up with him for a while and bided his time. However, in early September of that year, Lucky and Lansky decided it was time to move. They hired a Jewish gangster named Samuel Red Levine to come in from Toledo, Ohio, and take care of Maranzano. And on September the 10th, 1931, he did just that. Lucky knew that Maranzano had been having tax troubles. So he told Red Levine, and Red Levine devised a plan. That afternoon, Red and 3 other men showed up at Maranzano's office, dressed as government agents and presenting themselves as IRS men. Maranzano had been expecting an audit, so all of his men were unarmed, which was a godsend for Red and his hit squad. They took Maranzano to the side and asked if they could step into his office so they could get a better look at his tax records. Maranzano agreed and led them in. But little did he know, he had just sealed his fate. As soon as the door was shut, Red and another henchman pulled knives. Maranzano instantly knew the jig was up, so he began to put up a fight. And despite his efforts, he was stabbed 6 times, but still continued to fight. So his assassin shot him 4 times, and Maranzano fell to the ground.
Jesus.
But for good measure, they walked over to his body and slit his throat, and then fled the scene. They wanted to make sure that fucker was dead.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure he wasn't getting back up. Lucky had won and had become the de facto crime lord of New York City. But Lucky wanted to be more democratic with his power. So he scrapped the title of boss of all bosses and put the power in the hands of the families. Lucky set up the 5 families as a commission. The head of every family would run their family and not interfere with the business of other families. Any official mob business would go through the commission, and no boss was above any other boss, although no one dared challenge Lucky's authority. Lucky was now the top of the food chain. Even though there was no boss above another, Luciano was revered because he had organized the commission and therefore was looked upon as a leader. Lucky began making more money than he had ever seen. He had come a long way from living in a tenement and being a lowly street thug, but he was most proud of sharing the wealth with his friends and his crime syndicate. Lansky was making all of his money moves for him, and their friend Bugsy Siegel could be called upon at a moment's notice in order to take care of business if need be. And if he needed a job done discreetly, he could call on his friends in Murder, Inc., which was a contingency of Jewish gangsters that Lucky used as his personal hit squad for the mob. Things were definitely good for Lucky and company. That was until an associate of Lucky's named Dutch Schultz ran afoul of Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas Dewey. Dewey had no love for the mob whatsoever. He was a Boy Scout in every sense of the word. He had begun to dig into the mob's numbers game and found that Schultz had made thousands of untaxed income, putting Schultz right in Dewey's crosshairs. As Dewey dug deeper, he also found out about Schultz's protection extortion racket, and this was costing Schultz time and money. So he went to Luciano and Lansky and told them that Dewey needed to be eliminated. Lucky considered it and even sent Murder, Inc. on a scouting mission to get Dewey's daily routines down. But after much consideration, it was decided that would be a very bad idea. Dewey was too high profile, and killing him would bring unwanted attention. Schultz was absolutely furious. He stormed out of Luciano's office and vowed to kill Dewey himself. And Lucky knew that Schultz was unhinged and would follow through with that threat. He also knew that he would have to take care of Schultz. He couldn't have Schultz challenging his authority or the authority of the Mafia at large. So the decision was made to eliminate Schultz. But before Lucky could act on Schultz, he had to focus on a little bit of Hollywood business. Since Luciano had been on top, he had expanded his drug operation out to the West Coast, keeping the stars supplied with heroin. And he had been traveling out west since 1933 and wanted to get into the film business. But by the time he had gotten to LA, the Chicago outfit was already heavily embedded in the film industry. So Lucky couldn't really get a hold in that arena. But with his narcotics connections, he was raking in the cash until some of the outfit's dealers began to muscle in on his territory. Lucky was not happy about this in the slightest. So he set up a meeting with the outfit's leader, Frank Nitti, because by this time, Capone, he's in jail. Frank Nitti's taken over, so he had to go talk to Frank Nitti. In September of 1934, Lucky went out to Chicago and met with Nitti at the Sherman Hotel. The two had lunch and talked about their Hollywood businesses. Lucky told Nitty that he would stay out of the film industry if Nitty would stay out of the LA narcotics industry. There was room enough for both of them to operate separately in town, and Lucky also made it known that he wasn't asking. These were the terms. And if Nitty refused, there would be consequences. And he gave Nitty 24 hours to think it over and met him for lunch again the next day. But the meal was extremely tense, and Nitty refused to give up the drug business in LA. And he got up and left the meeting and walked out into the Chicago fall. As he stood on the street, a car drove by and sprayed Frank Nitty full of bullets. But ever the fighter, Nitty survived and gave Lucky what he wanted. He's like, hey, you know what? Here, I'm going to survive, but you can have it. Fuck it, I don't care. Nitty stuck to
don't go to lunch with Lucky.
No, if he tells you you're going to do something, you're going to do it. So Nitty stuck to the silver screen and left the silver spoon to Lucky. Lucky was laying down the law. If anyone crossed him, they would get the same treatment. Now, while Lucky was focused on other business, Dutch Schultz had been making plans to follow through on his promise and take out Thomas Dewey. Lucky had not forgotten Schultz's defiance. And when it was evident that Schultz was going to follow through and make business rough for the syndicate, Lucky struck. Lucky received word that Schultz was going to kill Dewey on October the 23rd, 1935. So he sent a hit squad down to Newark, New Jersey on October the 21st to get rid of the problem. The hit squad was led by Charlie the Bug Workman, and shortly after 10 p.m., the squad busted into the Palace Chop House and killed 3 of Schultz's associates and shot Schultz as he was using the bathroom. Say that 5 times fast. The men fled thinking they had finished the job, but Schultz didn't die immediately. In an attempt to save his life, one of his men called an ambulance, and Schultz was taken to the hospital. He was questioned about who shot him, but never gave up a name, and died the next day after emergency surgery. Luciano had gotten rid of a problem, but he would soon have an even bigger one on his hands. So yeah, those mobsters are not talking. I don't know why the cops can't get that through their head.
See, Ryan is set up perfectly with the props tonight with this little mason jar worth of, or moonshine that he's drinking from. I'm sure. I
told you it was bathtub gin.
Gross.
The very same attorney that he had saved from Dutch Schultz and his hitmen was now the special prosecutor of New York City, appointed by the governor and vigorously backed by Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. This spelt bad news for Lucky, because Dewey and LaGuardia had teamed up and declared war on organized crime. And with Schultz being gone, they turned their attention to Luciano and his various rackets, in particular his prostitution business. On February the 1st, 1936, Dewey ordered a raid on all of the brothels in Manhattan and Brooklyn. In the process of cleaning them out, they arrested 125 sex workers and traffickers and questioned all of them. And through their interrogation, they gleaned enough info to surmise that Lucky was heavily involved in sex trafficking. In all, Dewey had Lucky on 90 counts of forced prostitution.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
God
so,
dang.
It was time to bring him in. Now, Lucky was down in Miami when the brothels were raided, and he had heard about what happened. And his sources told him that he was about to be arrested too. So Lucky took a detour and fled to our favorite mob-friendly hideout, Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Yeah, there we go.
Thinking he would be safe there because the cops were on the take and no one would bother him there. However, he didn't count on Dewey's men coming to get him. As he strolled down Bathhouse Row, a detective from New York City who was on assignment in Hot Springs spotted Lucky and immediately called Dewey. Dewey sent 2 more detectives down to Arkansas with the order to arrest Lucky on sight. And on April the 1st, 1936, 2 detectives saw Lucky walking with the local chief of detectives. They walked right up to them both and put Lucky in cuffs, arresting him right in the middle of downtown. The Hot Springs authorities were not happy and put up one hell of a fight to keep Lucky from being sent back to New York City. But eventually, Dewey and his legal acumen won out, and Lucky was put on a train to New York. Arriving at Penn Station on April the 18th, Lucky thought to himself that they should have just let Schultz kill Dewey when they had the chance. But here he was now awaiting trial because he saved Dewey. Lucky's prostitution trial began in May, but ended in June of 1936. Although he insisted that he hadn't done anything he was accused of, the jury found him guilty on 60 counts of forced prostitution, and the judge did not take it easy on him. He threw the book at Lucky and gave him 30 to 50 years in prison. Lucky couldn't believe it. He had never expected to be caught up in the legal web. He had been so careful as to not gain any unwanted attention, but here he was, and there was nothing he could do about it.
Those bitches be talking.
Mm-hmm. People be snitching.
I know.
At first, he was sent to Sing Sing prison, but authorities thought it was too close to the city and moved him to a prison on the Canadian border called the Clinton Correctional Facility, a place that he jokingly called Siberia. But from day one of his incarceration, Lucky was trying to get out of prison. He tried filing appeal after appeal, and several of the witnesses that testified against him had even recanted their stories. But nothing worked, and Lucky was stuck. He had to run his criminal empire from behind bars. His first official act was having Vito Genovese stand in his stead. But Genovese ended up fleeing to fascist Italy in 1937. So Frank Costello stepped in and carried out Lucky's orders. Unless something miraculous happened, Lucky had no chance of getting out. But then the tide of the world changed. In 1941, World War II broke out. And the U.S. was at war with Japan, Germany, and most importantly, Italy. In February 1942, an ocean liner that was being converted into a troop transport named the Normandy caught fire in the New York City port and burned completely. The U.S. Naval Office feared that it was sabotage, but they knew the mob ran the unions that worked the ports and the docks, and in order to secure the ports, they needed support from the mob. And to get that support, they had to talk to the number one guy at the very top of the food chain, Charles Lucky Luciano.
And it all comes full circle.
So the government started working with some criminals. So the naval office.
I'll keep my mouth shut on that.
Hey. The naval office began dealing with Meyer Lansky and had him be the liaison between Lucky and the Navy. Once Lucky gave them the go-ahead, Lansky pledged the mob support. Luciano promised the docks and ports would be safe, and the government kept the mob's involvement very top secret.
Was the Casey family over the docks? Because I thought the Bananas were over the docks.
I can't remember. If I
Okay.
could have been.
Well, they were talking to Lucky, so
They were talking to Lucky, so Lucky, he's top down.
What he said went right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, could you imagine though, just being like, "Hey, I'm U.S. Special Agent Blake Smith, and we got a job for you. You're kind of high up, right?" Could you imagine being that agent? Like, really? Am I really going?
Right. You got to go talk to Meyer Lansky. Who's going to talk to Lucky Luciano.
And don't let Bugsy get involved.
This is my partner, Shelly. She's blonde and pretty. She's got a question for you. I'm gonna be over here.
I'd be like, "How you doing?"
Yeah. Dude, if Bugsy would have got involved, it would have blew the lid off of everything.
Here's the thing, in case you don't know, Bugsy was called Bugsy because he was crazy. You say, "Oh yeah, they're buggy."
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was nuts.
Yeah.
So they called him Bugsy because man, he hated that nickname, by the way.
And he was absolutely volatile. So anytime anytime they needed like business taken care of.
That's one that I know about, thanks to our Black Dahlia episodes.
Oh yeah, you know all about Bugsy Siegel.
Yeah, I had to look into him pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll talk about him more in a minute. So the government kept their involvement with the mob absolutely top secret. But because of his cooperation, Lucky was moved to the Greater Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York, a nicer prison with much better living conditions. And from his new digs, he ordered every connected man to be vigilant and report any suspicious characters to military authorities. But if you had to, deal with the problem accordingly. You know.
It would be considered suspicious.
I don't know. The mob thought you were suspicious.
Oh, okay.
And the mob took him at his word, and they thwarted numerous plots and challenges to the war effort down at the docks. But Lucky wasn't content just sitting in his cell. He wanted to actually go out and help the war effort. And when he got wind that the U.S. was planning to launch an invasion in Italy, he offered to go over to Sicily and serve as a soldier and guide for the army. And the naval office was grateful, but they were like, yeah, no.
I think so.
I don't think we need you. We appreciate it, but no. But they did need intelligence for their Sicilian landing. So Luciano used his contacts in Sicily and got the military valuable info for the 1943 invasion. With Lucky's help, the U.S. was able to cut up the Italian peninsula from Sicily and take the fight to Germany. Eventually, in 1945, the U.S. won World War II, and because Lucky was willing to help, the U.S. got the governor of New York, who was at the time, believe it or not, Thomas Dewey, the man who put him behind bars, to commute Lucky's sentence in January of 1946. However, as part of the deal, Lucky was no longer welcome in the U.S. and was to be deported back to his Sicilian homeland. So, after his pardon, Lucky was transported to a cell on Ellis Island, where he would await his deportation from the country that he loved so much. On February the 9th, 1946, he was taken by immigration agents to a freighter ship bound for Italy that was going to leave the next morning. But while he waited for his departure, his friends threw him one last shindig. Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, Will Moretti, Tommy Lucchese, Joe Adonis, and Stefano Magadino bribed the men guarding Luciano.
Yeah, there's your who's who of mobsters right there.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of them. So they bribed the men guarding Luciano and brought food and alcohol and women onto the boat. They partied deep into the night and sent their friend off in style. The mobsters talked about old times and discussed current business before bidding their friend farewell. The next morning, the freighter left New York Harbor and took Lucky across the sea. Lucky would arrive in Sicily in early March. He visited relatives and took a trip to his hometown, and he really enjoyed visiting family and seeing the sights of the old country, but he really missed his friends, and most of all, missed all the action in New York City. He once told a reporter, "I'm a city boy. Italy's dead. Nice, but dead." He would do whatever he could to get back into the action. And that chance would come in October 1946, when Lansky arranged for Lucky to come live in Havana, Cuba. The mob owned a racetrack and several casinos in town, and while it wasn't in the U.S., it was close enough for key mob members to party with Luciano and discuss business. In December of 1946, Lansky arranged for Frank Sinatra to fly out and play a show just for Lucky and other mobsters at the Hotel Nacional. This was kind of a homecoming for Lucky, and all the mob bigwigs were there. Everyone paid tribute to the returning crime lord. However, there was a bit of tension between Lucky and the now returned Vito Genovese. Genovese wanted Lucky's spot. He had a private meeting with Lucky and tried to get Lucky to declare himself the boss of all bosses and let Genovese run everything in New York City. This suggestion pissed Lucky off to no end. He told Genovese, "There is no boss of all bosses. I turned it down in front of everybody. If I ever change my mind, I will take the title, but it don't belong to you. Right now, you work for me, and I ain't in the mood to retire. Don't ever let me hear this again, or I'll lose my fucking temper." So,
I'm just watching our live stats of New York followers just go down and down.
But this was no time for arguments. This was a celebration.
Make sure you make fun of cornbread later. That's fine.
I don't care.
He's fine. He'll be fine.
However, there was one very important piece of business to discuss while they were all in Cuba. Meyer pulled Lucky to the side and talked to him about their old friend Bugsy Siegel. The mob commission had given him a substantial amount of money to open up a casino called the Flamingo out in Las Vegas. He had spent a ton of the mob's money and was now asking for more. Lansky explained the situation and told Lucky he tried to protect Bugsy, telling the other Mafia members that they would get their money back, but he felt like he couldn't stall anymore. Lucky told Lansky, Maya, this is business. Bugsy broke our rules. Lansky knew what that meant. Bugsy was going to have to pay up.
Or get whacked.
For wasting the mob's money. And within a year, Bugsy was shot dead in his apartment by an unknown assailant. Even though this massive mob meeting had taken place in Cuba, it was still too close to the U.S. for the comfort of the FBI. By 1947, they learned that Lucky was living in Cuba. So the FBI had the Cuban secret police arrest Lucky and hand them over to the FBI for questioning. The FBI asked Lucky just what he thought he was doing in Cuba. And Lucky said that he was managing a gambling concession. And according to his business records, he did have some stake in a casino and a racetrack on the island. But the FBI still didn't like it. And they weren't the only ones paying attention. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics also found out about the mobster being in close proximity to the U.S. And the head of the organization, Harry Anslinger, believed that the increase of heroin coming into the U.S. was in direct correlation to Lucky being so close to the United States. And he demanded that Cuba deport Lucky, or the U.S. would be forced to withhold any legal narcotic shipments to Cuba. Facing a national crisis, the small island nation bounced Lucky out of the country and sent him packing back to Italy on March the 20th, 1947. And with no other options, Lucky left peacefully and bought a first-class ticket on a ship back to his home country.
So, but the U.S. had the Cuban police pick him up?
They had him pick him up and turn him over to the FBI.
Back, but
no.
The FBI didn't want him back in the U.S. They wanted him back in Italy.
The FBI didn't really care, but the Bureau of Narcotics cared. The FBI was like, hey, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, too close to Castro.
Yeah. Right. Well, Castro, at the time, I don't think Castro was really doing much, which he does later on, but because I think Batista was in charge at this point.
Okay.
But the Bureau of Narcotics were like, hey, we were seeing a bunch of heroin come into the country, and it's mighty funny that the heroin kingpin of New York is living 90 miles off the coast.
40s yet?
Yeah, I said this is the 40s, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to think of when the Bay of Pigs was. So
yeah, this was 47 when they kicked Luciano.
Okay. The Bay of Pigs, don't quote me on
61 was Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is before Castro's taken over.
Okay,
the mob is in
so
Havana.
Castro isn't in there yet. Okay.
Yeah, not just yet, no. But like I said, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was like, hey, if you don't get him out of your country, we do have legal narcotics that we do ship to you from the U.S. If you don't, we're going to stop those shipments altogether, and you won't get them. So
stop your medicine, basically.
They were like, okay, bye. Kicked them out. So Lucky returned to Italy, but did not want the quietness of the countryside. So he got himself an apartment in Rome, where he could feel that old familiar hustle and bustle like he had back in New York City. He resigned himself to working with local mafiosos and hanging out with American tourists, but still American law enforcement couldn't leave him well enough alone. Any bust of opium that came from Europe, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics blamed him for. Lucky once said, if someone slips on a fucking banana peel, the cops call me to see if I'm selling bananas.
All right, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. But the suspicion was enough for the Italian police to arrest Lucky in July of 1949 on suspicion of sending heroin to New York City. But a week later, they were forced to let him go because they found absolutely no evidence. But still, the Italian authorities banned him from Rome, forcing him to move to Naples, where the cops continued to harass him daily, to the point of taking his passport and placing an 8 p.m. curfew on the mobster. It never failed. And, that did not bode well for him at all. He hated that shit. Said it never failed. He was trying to live the quiet life and rest on the laurels of his former life. But the longer he was in Italy, the more he was harassed and the more his power diminished in the United States. And one former ally had taken notice. With Lucky in exile, Frank Costello was handling business. But Vito Genovese wanted to be the one in charge. Even though he was rebuked by Lucky in Cuba, he bided his time and waited to strike. He resented the fact that Costello had been the one to take over, and he wanted to take out his old rival. So on May the 2nd, 1967, Genovese struck. Sorry, 1957, sorry. Genovese struck. As Frank Costello was returning from dinner, Vincent the Chin Gigante was waiting in the lobby of his apartment building.
Vinny the Chin, yeah.
Vinny the Chin. Mm-hmm. He walked up to Costello, pulled a gun, and yelled, "This is for you, Frank." Costello saw the gun and put his hands up to shield his face. Vinny the Chin pulled the trigger, and blood went everywhere as Costello was hit. Vinny the Chin ran out the door, thinking he had killed Costello, but the bullet had only grazed Costello on the side of the head. The Chin had not finished the job. A furious Genovese and his crew waited on retribution, but none came. For whatever reason, Costello and the commission let it slide. So after a few months, a few months later, on October the 25th, 1957, Genovese decided to strike again. But this time, the target was Lucky's old friend and Costello's enforcer, Albert Anastasia. Anastasia walked into his favorite barber shop that morning, got into the barber chair, and closed his eyes as the barber went to work.
That's a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Suddenly, two men came into the shop with the lower parts of their faces covered like outlaws. They threatened the barber to keep his mouth shut. And the two men walked up behind Anastasia, raised their guns, and shot him twice. Anastasia's surprise caused him to jump out of the chair, where he was shot again and fell to the floor. As he was on the floor, he was shot 2 more times, and for good measure, the shooters put one in the back of his head.
Damn.
Frank Costello got the message and retired and turned everything over to Genovese. So he was like, "Yeah, no, here you go. Take it. I don't care." So Genovese had won and wanted everyone to know it. So he called the ill-fated Appalachian Conference on November the 14th, 1957 in Appalachian, New York. The murder of Anastasia and attempted murder of Costello had not gone unnoticed by Lucky.
I'm sorry, the Appalachian Conference?
Yes, the Appalachian Conference. Yes. Appalachian, not Appalachian. Okay. That is a bone of contention. You say Appalachian, I'll throw Appalachia. So
Dear God Almighty.
So it was the Appalachian Conference in New York. And it had, all this hadn't gone unnoticed by Lucky. Even in Italy, he knew exactly what was happening. He and Meyer Lansky were furious. So they began plotting revenge. And they knew it had to be a big show. So when Lansky and a virtual who's who of mobsters were invited to the Appalachian meeting, Lansky claimed he was sick and couldn't go. And while the meeting was taking place, Lansky tipped off local law enforcement. So the cops showed up to the meeting and all the mobsters scattered. But in the following days, the authorities were able to figure out just who had attended, exposing the national crime syndicate and putting the Mafia in the spotlight. Lucky read about the bust in Naples and laughed out loud, saying it couldn't happen to a couple of nicer guys. But Lucky and Lansky were not through with Genovese. Lansky called in a favor to Nelson Cantelops. Cantelops was a drug mule who had been sent to Sing Sing prison, and Lansky told him to tell an FBN agent, Federal Bureau of Narcotics agent, at the prison an elaborate story about how Genovese was smuggling drugs in from Europe. He did as he was asked, and in no time, the FBN arrested Genovese and made Cantelops their main witness in a case against the mobster, which netted Genovese 15 years in prison in 1959, where he died 10 years later. Genovese had learned a very valuable lesson. You never cross the boss. And although Lucky relished in this victory, not all was well for Lucky. Fidel Castro had taken over Cuba and kicked the mob out, putting an end to the revenue Lucky was pulling in from Havana and wiping out a quarter from the casinos and dog traps.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And wiping out a quarter of Lucky's earnings. Lucky felt neutered and started looking for a new income stream. So he spent much of the early 60s trying to sell his life story to film producers. One of these producers was with him on a fateful day in January 1962. Lucky went to the airport in Naples to pick up the film producer. And so he and Lucky could go and have lunch and discuss his life story. But on the way to Lucky's car, Lucky went straight to the ground, and doctors at the airport rushed over and tended to Lucky. But try as they might, they had no luck, and he was pronounced dead of a heart attack at 5:25 p.m., January the 26th, 1962. As lucky as he had been, he couldn't cheat death, and the world's most influential gangster was gone.
If I was lucky, I'd never go eat lunch again.
No.
All kinds of crap happens when you go eat lunch with Lucky.
Absolutely.
Not the pun at the end, Ryan. Come on, man.
Yeah, he was gone.
The doctors couldn't get
no luck.
They were.
As lucky as he was, he couldn't cheat death, and he was gone. So that is the story of Lucky Luciano. What do y'all think about Lucky?
I think what's interesting, kind of not necessarily about him, but about this whole story, is that if you've listened to us for a while now, you will have made connections to other episodes that we've covered, not necessarily about mobsters and stuff like that, because a lot of what you were talking about and the 40s, 60s, like all that kind of era, like we discussed on the Black Dahlia, on the Marilyn Monroe series. Like it's real interesting to me that
it was a pre-runner to John Gotti, who
it's just kind of like it's interesting that all the puzzle pieces start to fall into place as like we go on and on and on and go down these different paths. So I don't know. I was really interested with that. I was like, oh, Bugsy, I know all about him. I had to look him up.
Right.
Black
you know, and he actually, so there was a lot I had to cut out of that because I mean, his story is huge. And like, literally it's the story of the Mafia.
Yeah.
And he knew Capone. He was really good friends with Capone before Capone went out west. He knew everybody that there was to know in the mob. And for this episode, I read this book. It's called Boardwalk Gangster, The Real Lucky Luciano by Tim Newark. And it is like, there is so much information here. If you really want to get, I mean, because that was the Cliff Notes. If you really want to get into the head of Lucky Luciano, check this book out. It's fantastic. But what do you guys think about him? I mean, do you think that he was? Here's what I'm thinking about Lucky Luciano is at the very end, he wasn't bothering anybody. They should have just left the fucking man alone. Like he had done his time. He wasn't really involved in anything, and there was nothing they could pin on him. So just leave the man alone and let him enjoy his life. I mean, he's already been in prison, and you're keeping him away from his friends. You're keeping him away from the place he loves the most. He was punished enough, I think, at the very end. But what do y'all think?
Of course, you know me. I'm all about the mobster. I think that he was very smart, and he was very smart in keeping himself alive, purely for the reason of, he says, there is no boss of all bosses, because that immediately puts a target on you.
Right.
He's immediately like, I'm going to share the wealth. You get a crime family. You get a crime family. You get a crime family. He gives everybody kind of like, he gives everybody their cut of the pie, which in turn gains him favor with all of these other heads of family. So I think he was very smart in his ability to keep himself alive that way. Kept a target off of his back, although not completely, but there were still some people who on occasion would try to go after him, but they weren't successful.
Right.
I kind of wondered what would have happened if he wouldn't have been deported. Because he wasn't even doing half the crap that some of these little, thug gangs were doing in the streets of New York and even in Chicago. Go ahead.
I'll say, as a matter of fact, in this book, he kind of makes the case that he actually wasn't really involved in all the prostitution stuff that they said he was involved in. And because he swore innocence, he's like, look, I'm not involved in that. And there is evidence to suggest that maybe he was involved somewhat, because I don't think he could be in the mob. He was, but like he wasn't directly involved, like some of like Thomas Dewey made it out to be.
Yeah,
he was smart enough to know to get everybody to work for him, and pay up.
Like I said, and there were so many people that recanted their story. There's actually a woman. I didn't really go into her because like when you start going into the trials, there's a lot. Her name was Cokie Flo. She was a madam. And
of course it was.
And she
of
hated
course that was her name.
Yes, she hated that name, by the way. But there's evidence to suggest, that like, she was an addict, and she would say whatever anybody wanted her to say, given the right circumstances, so they used some of her, and then she ended up recanting her testimony too. So it's, I think that maybe Dewey and LaGuardia and the governor of New York at the time were just like throwing out trumped up charges because they knew they had the biggest gangster in the United States in their city and in their
they wanted to set an
state.
example.
Right, and they wanted to be like, hey, look what happened to him. If this can happen to him, it can happen to you too. We'll do whatever we can to make sure we get him. So I think that there was a lot of that going on with the law and Lucky as well.
Right.
But,
Blake, your thoughts?
I mean, you know, I'm just over here like the mob life. I don't know. No, I find to me it's, I don't know. I'll just say this. The whole mob world and all that stuff, the bootlegging and everything. Like, I get why they had to do what they do, but it's just one of those things like, dude, you're selling alcohol. Yay. You know, I mean,
but it's fascinating though. Like, I mean, that they were able to do what they were and able to build what they were able to build and do what they were able to do. Just
it is, that part is fascinating. I mean, I don't know. I think he's definitely a freaking character. I do like the fact that out of all the stories that we have covered on this podcast, he's probably one that lived out the most peaceful life at the end. You know,
Probably.
I'm just back home in my homeland, you know, eating pasta and carrying on about my day.
Right. And that's the thing too, is if in the story you can kind of tell he does try to keep himself out of the violence as much as possible. Rothstein really had an influence on him about pulling strings from behind the scenes. Now, that being said, when he was in Maranzano's employ, which if you read the book, they kind of go into the whole thing where he was his gun for hire, and he did get into some street fights and he did kill some people, but he preferred to kind of hang back and run. Yes. But he preferred to hang back and kind of do things from the shadows. And
I will say it was interesting to know exactly like where you're talking about in Hot Springs, where he was picked up, having spent you know, an entire, I don't know, I think I just recently spent about 3 or 4 days up there and just sightseeing and all that stuff, and like went to the boardwalk, and they have the sign, you know, right there that says, Bathhouse Row and all that stuff. So yeah, I haven't been to Hot Springs, and you like the mob, absolutely go. A lot of history there with it. They're pretty kind of somewhat proud of it.
Oh yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, we went to the mob museum there. They talked about Lucky Luciano there. It's a fascinating city, but definitely mob run, and we've gotten to investigate up there.
Yes, we have.
A former mob run club.
Yes.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely fascinating. It's a really cool city. It's really worth going to check out. All these mobsters I mentioned, most of them were running around that city at some point.
Yeah.
And you can go, the American Gangster Museum. Was it American Gangster Museum or was it just the Mob Museum? I can't remember, but the Mob Museum is really cool.
Mob Museum.
No. Yeah. No, I think it's the American Gangster Museum that's there.
It is the Mob Museum, because American Gangster Museum's in New York. Yeah.
One of the two.
So I've been to New York City, and when I was in New York City, there is the Museum of the American Gangster that I did go to. And when I was there, they actually had these ceiling tiles, these ornate ceiling tiles that were sitting up against the wall. And I was like, what the hell's that about? You know, because they have a bunch of displays and everything, but these ceiling tiles are just kind of sitting out. And I think they were trying to look for a way to display them, and they were the ceiling tiles from Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky's office they were able to get their hands on. So that was pretty cool. I recommend going to that museum if you're ever in New York City. But yeah, guys, so final thoughts on Lucky Luciano. What do you think?
Blake?
He knew what he was doing. I'll say that. That's for damn sure. I don't know. It's just very interesting to hear kind of this birth of the modern mob, you know, the organized crime, to hear how the 5 families came, you know, about, so to speak, and how that they were born and then just kind of just grew from there. So I found that pretty interesting. He's a freaking character.
Yeah, and I love the fact that he really, again, like you said, he was an innovator of the modern, mob. And still, the 5 families still exist, as far as I know, allegedly. I I love this idea of this creativity of coming in with nothing, building yourself up through hustling, whether it's by nefarious or non-nefarious means. He was, and you see this a lot in a lot of stories, that you have these children of immigrants that at age, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they decide they are never going to be poor. They will not live in poverty. And that drive. Now, unfortunately, he went on the, on the opposite side of the law, but it became, like Houdini did. Houdini was, 10 years old, was like, I'm never going to be poor like ever again. And it seemed like a really good motivator to build yourself up, the land of opportunity. They truly, even though they did it on the wrong side of the law, showed what was possible if you worked hard. And he found more creative ways to work hard. He built something that to this day, the Lucchese family still, that is his family.
No, I think is it the, no, God, is it the Lucchese family his family, or there's, okay, I'll go with that because I think that it's a different family that's his family. I could be completely wrong though. I'll refer to you on that, but yeah.
Pretty sure.
But yeah.
Anyway, if I'm wrong, then okay. I don't think I am though.
I don't think you are either, but for some reason I'm thinking. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
Omerta.
But yeah, he definitely was a character. He definitely was very creative in the ways that he was able to make his money. And you got to admire that gumption and that grit. Like you said, just to be like, hey, I'm going to make something of myself. I don't care what I got to do. I'm going to be somebody one of these days, and I'm never going to look back. I'm never going to be poor ever again. I don't care what I got to do to claw my way to the top. I'm going to get there. And he's very, very interesting. And I am so happy to have read this book, and I am fascinated by anything to do with mob, and there will be more mob stories in the future.
All right. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
All right. Sounds good. Well, y'all remember After Dark with EVP, our other show that we also do that's on Paraflix Paranormal Plus, don't forget about that one. Season 1, Season 2 are all out, all 16 episodes. We are about to start filming Season 3 that is going to be dropping here in just a couple of months. Actually, I think in like a month and a half. Shit.
Whoops, we better get on it.
We're still pre-production on that. Anyways, so we've got wonderful special guests on After Dark with EVP, as well as haunted locations featuring some of our best caught evidence from that location you're not going to see anywhere else other than on Paraflix. So that is available on Amazon Fire, Roku TV, Apple TV, iOS, and Google Play. You want to make sure you use our link to sign up, which is going to be posted to our Facebook page tomorrow via our link tree. It's also shown in those show notes for you audio listeners. You can use our code AFTERDARK25, because I get that message about 10 times every week. After Dark 25 for 25% off your annual subscription for the entire year. It's like $37.50. Wonderful content on there. Go check it out. Again, that's going to be posted to our Facebook page tomorrow morning. And within that Linktree link as well, you're going to find every social media channel we are on, our online merchandise store, our public investigations, and our Patreon page as well. Our Patreon page is the fastest and easiest way you can directly help support the show. For just $5 a month, you will gain access to over 400 additional Patreon exclusive videos. Your support from this goes directly to the show and all the ghostly and true crime adventures that we get to bring to you week after week. This price will never change, and with that, you currently get our pre and post broadcasts, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast, where we discuss topics further, fight, debate, act stupid, show our underwear, share very personal stories that we shouldn't be sharing. But anyways, you can see a side of us you don't get to see on the podcast. We kind of tout it as that late show with EVP. It also includes our no, we don't. It also includes our Patreon exclusive unedited investigation footage from places like Squirrel Cage Jail, Hill House Manor, among others. So if you've ever want to watch any of that, now is your chance. That is only on Patreon. And do not forget, we offer that 7-day free trial for our Patreon page, so you can check it out prior to purchasing. If you'd like to spend time with us, go and check out our public investigations page. We do have some tickets still left available. I believe, I don't know if we have. Yeah, we have more that are going to be coming out here in a little bit. So make sure you go subscribe to the Eventbrite page so you can catch that. Also, October the 5th, we will be at the Rock Island Paracon. So we'll be posting that link up so you can get your tickets for that. But make sure you follow us on all social media channels, search everything Vaguely Paranormal, and look for that green sound wave. And remember, you audio listeners, you can always tune in and see our faces live on Facebook and YouTube every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. These are all the ways you can directly support Everything Vaguely Paranormal, but we also appreciate your love and support for us through those likes, comments, shares, views, and downloads. And remember, as always, any questions, comments, stories you want to share with us, those can be submitted to us at theebppod@gmail.com. That is theebppod@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube.
All right, so thanks for tuning in to another weekly edition of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Ryan Roberts. These are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith, Miss Shelley Pruitt, and we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, y'all.